this talk is inspired by a book by Will Bowen, and it just so happens to be that this book, published in 2006, has over 10 million people have participated in this program, because over 10 million people have ordered wristbands. You can order them directly through the website. I believe it's called The Complaint-Free World. And people in 106 countries have practiced this. And it just so happens that Will Bowen is a Unity minister, well, was a Unity minister, in Kansas City, right there near Unity Village. So Unity Village is in Lee's Summit, right next to Kansas City. So for those of you who have done this work before, stay with me, it's going to be worth it. This is a work that I think is really worth revisiting each year at least. And I must confess that, speaking of complaining, I've been doing my fair share of complaining recently. And I keep on telling Jen, I need that. I think I need to do the Complaint-Free World talk, don't I? And she said, yeah, you do. So I need this talk. And I'm bringing you with me because I think we all need this talk. And there are such benefits to what I'm about to share. And it's so beneficial, and it's such a powerful concept that the author in this book says, in your hands, you hold the secret to transforming your life. And the subtitle right below the main title is How to Stop Complaining and Start Enjoying the Life That You Always Wanted. So those are big statements. But before we begin with all this work, we have to define what complaining is. And it can be defined different ways, but Wikipedia says complaining is a spoken expression of grief, pain, or discomfort. A spoken expression of grief, pain, or discomfort, or discontent. And by the author's definition, he expands it to gossiping and criticism. So I know the question is, well, what are we going to talk about now? What do we have to talk about? And this also includes expletives, by the way. And I'll talk about that in a minute. It'll be the beeped out part of the YouTube video. But some examples of complaining are, I have a headache. So that's a verbal, even though it's true, that's a verbal complaint. Look what those Republicans or Democrats are doing to the country. Look, the nation is headed to hell in a handbasket. He never cleans his room, right? I mean, we're all, she's such a neat freak. Oh, look at that car, it's going way too fast. Then there's expletives, which I don't need to describe. But George Carlin, he talked about complaining this way. He said, you notice how every car that's going slower than you is a moron? And every car that's going faster than you is an idiot? Look at that idiot go! So you're right in the middle there, right? You're driving, and everybody that's driving faster than you, God, look at those guys. And everybody's driving slower than you. But there's you that's just right. You're just right. And so what else does that's a good analogy for life, isn't it? We all think we're just right, and that the way someone else is doing something might not be, perfect. And this also applies to negative thoughts. And complaints are negative thoughts, and they are not helping. They're not helping anything. And think about every complaint being a prayer. So here's some examples. I'll never get that raise, and so it is, right? I'll never find my life partner, and so it is, right? Putin is never going to stop doing X, Y, Z, and so it is. So these complaints, because every spoken word can be thought of as a prayer, that's our energy that we're putting out there. We might as well just say, and so it is, at the end of it, right? And speaking of negative thoughts, on my first talk here, I think I said that according to scientists, they say that we have 60,000 thoughts a day, and most of those thoughts are negative, and 95% of our thoughts are repetitious, aren't they? We keep on thinking the same thoughts. So if most of our thoughts are negative and most of our thoughts are repetitious, that's a lot of negative messaging going on there. David Hawkins, there's an author, David Hawkins, who wrote a book called, don't trip over that cord. No, he wrote a book called Power versus Force. Power versus Force. And in it, the basic premise of the whole book is that positive energy, the positive energy that comes from positive thinking is so much more powerful than the energy that comes from negative thinking. So if we just increase our positive thinking just a little bit, it way outweighs so many more negative thoughts, because positive energy vibrates much higher. It's much more powerful. That's the whole premise of his book. So let me just talk about, why do we complain? It's worth looking at. Sometimes it just feels good to complain. You know, it just feels good to just kind of express that into the room because it brings some sense of relief to us. But other times, complaining is kind of about getting attention, right? It kind of brings the attention back to us. It also has the tendency to remove responsibility, because if we complain, we're not actually doing something. We're cutting somebody down, you know, perhaps. Or we're cutting some process or some institution down without really doing anything about it. So it's removing some responsibility unless we do something about it. And complaining could just be a bad habit. How many of us grew up in families where complaining was a frequent mode of communication? It's just, you know, I'll just call that the valence of our families. If a lot of it was complaining, we inherit that energy. We inherit those habits. And, you know, 20, 30 years later, we're saying the same things, we're repeating the same amount of complaints. So this is about one of the reasons why we come to places like this, is to change ourselves. What a perfect day to talk about change, right? When I was a kid, I complained about my mom, and my mom always complained about my dad. And that made me really angry. And I was talking to my dad, and I was saying, well, that's, you know, mom is this, and mom is that, and my dad said, bite your lip, son. And I never understood. I thought, if I bite my lip, that's not fair, because justice is not happening, so I want to complain about my mom. But he didn't want to complain. He knew that she complained about him, but he didn't want to perpetuate that complaining. So I'm getting, so many years later, the wisdom of him saying, bite your lip, son. So thank you, Dad. And Will Bowen, the author of this book, says that complaining is an epidemic that is destroying our happiness, our relationships, our health, our success. But the problem is that most people aren't even aware the extent that they're complaining, and that's what today's talk is about. So, here's the solution. Stopping complaining will transform your life, because into the void of no complaining, what are we going to do? We may have nothing but kind things to say. That's one thing that may happen. And what if we envision a world where we're not blaming anybody and we're taking responsibility and action? Like voting is a perfect example. It's going to happen right here on November 5th. That's such a wonderful way of putting in action, making change, right? And you hear people on the stump, they say, don't complain, vote, right? So that's a perfect example of this theory. And also, just falling out of the habit of complaining begins what I think is called the butterfly effect, where if you change just a little bit, if you complain 20 times a day instead of 50 times a day, if you complain 20 times a day instead of 100 times a day, how much is that going to change your life? How much is that going to change the people around you? It'll change things one step at a time. And this is the premise of how we can create a complaint-free world. It's not like there's going to be some big movement where we all join a Facebook group or a Zoom call and we discuss it. It's just you individually making that decision. So how do we actually do all this? Is it realistic to not complain ever? I say no. It's not realistic. But if we can, like I said, if we can take our complaining from here to here, I think that is realistic. So, but if we can't not complain for one day, how are we supposed to change our level of complaining? So this is what this program is about. So awareness is the key. And what I want you to do is I want you to, for those of you at home, if you found a wristband or a rubber band or something, and for those of you here, you get this gray wristband out. And in the book, if you get the book, and this I do, whoa. The book has a purple wristband on it, but I thought gray was a lot more kind of understated. That's why I got the gray ones. But what you do is you put the wristband on, and if you're willing, you can have today be day one. And if you catch yourself complaining, okay, let's say you've gone 3 days without complaining. You know how hard that is? And you complain on day 3. Then what you do is whatever hand this wristband is on, you say, all right, it's time to change my wristband. As a reminder, I'm going to switch to the other wrist. And now I'm on day 1 again. I'm on day 1. So the goal is if you don't complain after X number of days, you have not switched your wristband. Does anybody think that they could do this, like for 1 day? 1 day? Who thinks they could do it for 1 day? Okay. It's tough. It is really tough. I've been with groups of people where someone reached 7 days without complaining. 7 days, okay? But the way he describes it in the book, the challenge is to go 21 days without complaining. It's your choice if you want to try that. But he says, why 21 days? Because it takes about 21 days for a chicken to hatch an egg. It takes 21 days for a new habit to be born. But I say, if you make it 3 days without complaining, you're pretty incredible. Try it. It's really enlightening. And here are some tips how to do this better. Find a complaint buddy. Okay, so you want to start this today, Jan, with me? All right. So we won't complain, and if I happen to complain and I don't change my wristband, then she'll tell me, I think it's time to change your wristband, right? So she'll remind me. That's a complaint buddy. And the next thing is think about the serenity prayer, right? God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So if you can change it, instead of complaining about it, change it, right? Like voting. If you can't change it, then you can't change it, right? So try not to complain about it for a period of time here when you're in this experiment. And you will notice, I think you'll notice some real changes, because my theory is it's not just about changing your outward complaining. It's about changing your inner habits. It starts with a thought. It starts with energy. It starts with these deep assumptions about, I'm right, I'm driving down the road, I'm right, and those people are wrong, and those people are wrong, right? So it really does shift. Instead of, I was going to say this for the end of the talk, but we're almost there anyway. Instead of driving, hating all the cars around you because you're in traffic, I know people who do this, and maybe you do too. Do you know people who, when they get on the freeway in the morning, or they get on the road, they bless all the cars around them? Anybody know people who do that? It's beautiful. Try it. Jen was telling me about this. It's just, you get on the freeway, instead of freaking out and starting to judge people and someone just passes you, just bless that person and just pray for everyone, that everyone makes it home safe. So that speaking of praising everyone, there's this thought from Emma Curtis Hopkins. Who's heard of Emma Curtis Hopkins? Emma Curtis Hopkins, welcome. Emma Curtis Hopkins taught Myrtle Fillmore, Charles Fillmore, Nona Brooks, who founded Science of Mind. Emma Curtis Hopkins was the teacher of teachers. She taught Ernest Holmes, who founded Religious Science, aka CSL. She taught Emily Cady, who wrote many of the books that are here in this facility right here. So Emma Curtis Hopkins said this, and I'm going to end with this. She said, if I were asked directly, what is the quickest way to get your healing power going? Now, she was talking to a group of prayers who pray for other people, but this can apply for healing yourself or healing others. But she said, if I were asked directly as to the quickest way to get your healing power going, I would probably say, praise everything and everyone. Praise everything and everyone. And that is the antithesis of complaining, isn't it? So if you get on the freeway and you think, bless, I praise everything and everyone. If through your day you just think, I praise everything and everyone, knowing that what's occurring is appropriate for them in that moment, and that they're here to teach you something. They are here as a gift for you, right? Then you begin to shift to this praising everything and everyone. Now, just like complaining, I don't think it's impossible that we're not going to complain for the rest of our lives. It's something that we as social beings do. Do I think it's possible to praise everything and everyone 24/7? Maybe not. But try it. Try it. It just may change your life. So with that, I'm complete, and let's just pray. And Michael, if you'll help me out. So just taking a deep breath and being grateful for this message today, thinking about the spirit of driving on the freeway. Thinking about the spirit of being at the store where someone is in front of you holding up the traffic in the aisle. Thinking about the spirit of walking down the street and having someone pass you by so quickly. You're just so angry at them. But just think for a moment. They may have had the worst news today. They may be struggling with something awful that you don't know. They're all a part of the human family. And sometimes you are them. Sometimes you're that person that passes a car going really fast. Sometimes you're that person holding up the traffic in the aisle. We take turns in that role. And so let's praise everything and everyone. Let's catch ourselves by complaining 0 times today. 1 day at a time. I'm willing to let this experiment happen within me because it's all about one thing, one word, and that's love. And I'm grateful for this, and so it is.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I watch them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Well, I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. For the colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people passing by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying that I love you. I hear babies cry, I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than we'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I think to myself, what a wonderful world.